Hey, this is the Renegade Master. With the release of Metroid Dread, I've been in the mood to talk about the Metroid series, and apparently I wasn't alone on this one. I was able to find a handful of like-minded content creators who also wanted to join in and talk about this legendary franchise. This is one of a handful of videos for an open collaboration called Project M5, talking about this amazing series that, for a while, was rarely acknowledged by the company that actually owns it. As you watch this video, feel free to check the description for a playlist containing a bunch of content creators and their videos on this series as well. And with that said, I hope you enjoy. Looking back at the Prime Trilogy, it's a little sad to see that the general consensus considers Prime 2 to be the weakest out of the trilogy. Metroid Prime was considered the foundation for the series that established Retro Studios as a respected developer, who somehow found a way to translate the tone and atmosphere of Super Metroid into a first-person adventure. Prime 3 was a great game in its own right, with a brilliant mix of old ideas from the series prior, and many new ideas exclusive to this game. All of this was wrapped in a simple enough package that fans of action games could also get a lot out of. That just leaves Prime 2 stuck in the middle as the game that doesn't have the impact that the first one had left, nor has the energy and broader appeal that the third game had. Which is such a shame, cause Prime 2 is filled to the brim with unique ideas. For better, and for worse. While I do find myself agreeing with the majority in saying that Echoes has a couple of rough spots, I find myself impressed with how it also has some of the highest highs of the trilogy as well. And when I think about Metroid Prime 2, one of the first things that springs to my mind is one of my favorite areas of the trilogy, the Sanctuary Fortress. One thing that stands out about the Sanctuary Fortress is the look of the area itself. Looking back at Prime 1 and even Super Metroid, most of the environments that emphasize machinery go for a more darker and claustrophobic feeling. This is fitting, as the Metroid series had some light leanings towards horror, similar to Alien, and especially fitting when you look up what piece of media that the Metroid series was inspired by. Going from this type of environment to a more futuristic location with all the advanced tech and all the light-up panels that you'd see in someone's expensive gaming rig, it's rather refreshing. The building itself is grandiose, and the area has some unique vibes to call its own, and the music just hits in all the right ways. It's definitely one of my highlights from Prime 2's OST. A criticism leveled at Echoes that I find myself agreeing with is the fact that while the game is a graphical improvement to its predecessor, when you go to Dark Aether, the areas start to blend together. Don't get me wrong, the atmosphere sells the oppressive tone, but when you get past that, the areas lack an identity when you're looking at their Dark World counterparts, except for the Sanctuary Fortress, or the Hive in this case. It stands above the other areas by the mere fact that it keeps the Sanctuary's visual identity in spite of the purple filter. Hell, the simple detail of changing the cyan highlights to red does make the place a little bit more intimidating to travel through, on top of all the other changes. The environment is great, but the enemies that are exclusive to this area actually do a good job in standing out as well. One of the primary enemies in this area are the quads, four-legged machines that are made out of two parts that require two different methods to take them out. The legs require the boost ball in order to bump into it, and the head requires a specific beam type to damage it. Floating spheres called resbits can be seen in certain parts of the fortress, and these enemies can hit you so hard they can actually damage the fourth wall. In Universe, this renders Samus helpless for a few seconds. It's a really creative enemy type. There are octopedes, which are just there, I guess. Finally, after getting the Spider Ball ability, several immobile machines that were just sitting around as background decorations start moving. The Ing Smasher, not really doing the job it was named after, I can tell, are big brutes that make traveling through this level far more interesting, as there's a new enemy to take down just as the average player would start to get comfortable in this new environment. The upgrades that are found in the Sanctuary are also some of the best that Prime 2 have to offer. The first one that'll be found in this area is the Spider Ball, and while the boss that precedes this battle is one of the most polarizing battles in the game, the actual power-up is worth the tribulations to get it. In the first Prime games, the use of this power-up had its shining moments, but never expanded beyond just using this item that functions similarly to just climbing a ladder. Echoes expands upon this by making the major use of this ability feel like puzzle platforming, and even in the few instances where its use is more simplistic, there's more window dressing to make this magnetic ball feel really good to use. The next upgrade that you'll get is the Echo Visor, a severely underutilized power-up. Now that's not to say that it's not special in its own right, it's just that it's primarily an item used for puzzle solving outside of a novel use or two. More on that later. So what does this thing even do? Well, the visor gives Samus a form of echolocation that's used to find sound waves that are keeping a nearby door closed, and by hitting that source you can cancel out the lock. Though its use is pretty limited, it is pretty cool that you get to become Daredevil for a hot minute. That's noteworthy at least. Though in the later parts of the fortress, you'll get access to one of the classics, the Screw Attack. Making the transition from the second dimension to the third, the Screw Attack functions like a hybrid between its 2D counterpart and the slightly nerfed version of the Space Jump from Super Metroid. This makes it far more useful for mobility above large gaps or on certain panels to jump up. Though in the rare instance where an enemy is flying in the same space that the Screw Attack is being used in, it can damage the enemy. I mean, it'll happen once during a planetary alignment, but it's freaking sweet when the rare instance when it does happen. This ability is really good. It effectively is a full-on upgrade over the grapple beam, as it also protects you from taking damage. There is one last power-up that's found here, but you only get it after beating the boss of the area, so I'll mention it when I get there. Halfway on the journey through the Sanctuary Fortress, you'll run into Dark Samus, killing off some space pirates and getting a much-needed rematch with her. And going off the previous encounter with her, the battle is pretty lit. Dark Samus will use many of her Phazon-related abilities, but also pulls out moves that look similar to Samus's, like the Boost Ball, the Seeker Missiles, and even the Charge Beam. It's a pretty intense fight, especially when the Dark Visor is needed just to keep track of her movement. And going by the last cutscene, it's pretty clear that the gap in power between the two characters seen in the beginning of the game has been cut down significantly. And when Retro breaks out the rule of threes, the following fight is going to be pretty damn good. Once you get through the Sanctuary Fortress, the Hive, and all the crazy stuff located in this place, you'll get to the third Guardian of the game, and one of my favorite bosses of the trilogy, Quadraxis. Similar to a lot of bosses in Echoes, they tend to be sized up versions of enemies that the player's been facing throughout the level. It's a pretty good design choice since it shows off the weakness of each boss without having to make it blatantly obvious. The difference with Quadraxis is that he's kinda, sorta, maybe a massive upscale from the quads that have been seen up until this point. It's the size of a building now. The battle with Quadraxis is a multi-phase masterpiece of game design, using a large amount of the abilities collected throughout the game. The first phase requires the disabling of Quadraxis' feet using the Morph Ball, then its legs need to be taken down. In order to do this, we'll need to use some charge shots or super missiles to damage the joint areas. A nice touch is that Quadraxis will start moving its non-damaged legs to the back as it starts to sustain damage. Every now and again it uses the aforementioned legs to form a tornado in the area, and the only way to avoid taking damage from this is using the Boost Ball. And after damaging all of its appendages, its head will fly off of the body and start firing on the area. Remember earlier in the video when I mentioned the novel use of the Echo Visor? Well, in this phase you have to cut off the connection between Quadraxis' head and its body, with the pressure of needing to use a visor that isn't the best for combat in order to do it. And once you take that down, with only a head unit remaining that actually gets damaged between the phases, use nearby Spider-Ball tracks to launch Samus into Quadraxis' head and deliver the coup de grace, finishing off one hell of a fight. Each one of these phases use some of the major upgrades that you've been collecting throughout the game, with the only one that feels left out is the Light and Dark Beam. And I have to hand it to Retro. Instead of just giving this boss more health, each phase just feels dynamic and it keeps the players on their toes, which is further enhanced by the ominous boss theme. The cherry on top of this boss fight is getting the Annihilator Beam at the end, an attack used by the boss and is one of the strongest beams in the game. And getting a power-up like this is one great bookend to one of the best areas in Prime 2, and is one of my favorite parts of the entire Prime Trilogy. Prime 2 was always considered the oddchild of the trilogy, but with everything that the Sanctuary Fortress accomplishes, alongside housing one of the best bosses in the Prime Trilogy, in my opinion, the fact that this game is considered the weakest out of these three games speaks volumes as to how high the bar was set. It's gonna be a while until we get to see what Prime 4 has to offer, what with all the delays it's been getting up to this point, but when it does come out, you know what standard I'll be holding it up to. Also, if you haven't yet, give Metroid Dread a shot. From all the gameplay shown off, it looks really lit. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. As said at the beginning of the video, this is an open collaboration with a handful of content creators, and if you want to see the rest of them, feel free to check the playlist with everyone else's video in the description below, or you can just click on the link that's probably going to be on screen right now. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the video, hope to see you in the next one, and have a nice day everyone.